So I can point to a few of our partners that we work with, and it doesn't really matter if you look at Microsoft or Cisco or VMware or Symantec, etc. They're all at a different point in that journey towards an enterprise app store in one way, shape, or form. I know from first-hand experience, I've seen some organisations take that down to kind of a onboarding process with their staff, where everything's provisioned, all accounts provisioned, kind of within 4 hours of them actually stepping foot in the door. So everything's web-based, everything's browser-based access, everything's auto-provisioned, auto-access with business processes and workflow behind those requests to ensure that people are getting access to the right services, but also that the cross-charging, the internal billing, everything's accounted for appropriately. But these are some of the largest organisations in the world. These are the large IT organisations. How realistic is it for enterprises inside Australia?
I think it is realistic, but you may not be able to get the complete experience. You may not be able to provision everything and get it down to the nth degree. But there is still we see a lot of customers who actually use a lot of manual processes in that onboarding process, and even just the simple things like identity, provisioning a user account. As soon as that person appears in the HR system, they should have a user account. That shouldn't even be a manual process. As soon as they're created as a person in the HR system, their account should be created. You can do things like, as soon as you issue a mobile phone number, issue them their password or a token so they can log on. So they don't even have the old school password type thing. So there's just some basic things you can do in terms of automating the onboarding process without the complete end-to-end App Store experience. But there are enough corporate App Store solutions now from the major partners that you can start looking at trying to surface these apps, because it's a massive load on the service desk within the customer. So the amount of calls that the service desk gets, for change of access, password change, or access to applications, they should be self-serviced through a self-service service catalogue, and also through a corporate application store.
I think also it's like, when it boils down to it, it's cost versus efficiency.
Yeah.
So, and we're finding nowadays, especially with the rise of cloud, SaaS, even for things like systems management, user provisioning, all that kind of stuff, the costs are coming down, and we're getting out-of-the-box solutions that for smaller customers, similar types of solutions that you would see in the enterprise, where it's a low cost to the business. So I'm seeing it a lot more. I'm seeing that adoption a lot more automation. Maybe not to the enterprise level, but certainly basic things like, as Scotty mentioned, things like user provisioning, allocation of assets like mobiles, mobile devices, laptops, all those types of things.
Yeah. I think it's about being fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Right? It's where are the returns? I think there's some non-negotiable areas. I mean, where there's the users involved and the user experience is paramount. I think that has to be addressed across the board. But if you don't have a multi-department workflow that you're putting through 50 users a week on, I mean, you're not going to get the returns by spending the money to automate that process. Yeah. So I think we need to focus on our users and what they need as a first priority, and then look at where else there is a return. Yep. As Graham alluded to, our vendors do have solutions which out of the box can deliver a lot of that capability. So it's something that you're going to get out of the box. The extensibility for that is, I think, a decision you make based on return.
I think it's also a journey, right? Because a lot of the larger organisations have a huge number of SaaS-based applications. And when you've got maybe 1 or 2 SaaS-based apps, that's fine. IT can manage, 2 or 3 different user accounts across 3 different platforms or whatever. The whole reason why Active Directory is so strong today in the marketplace is it's your single central security framework. Everything plugs into it to give auth. And cloud-based SaaS-based applications is kind of breaking that mold, because you now have all these separate, disparate usernames and passwords. We see it very prevalent in healthcare inside their networks, where they have a different EMR app that has a different username and password. So most clinicians will have 6 or 7 usernames and passwords. So what we're seeing is that, though that's sort of ring-fenced to healthcare, that's starting to become more of an issue in the enterprise, because they're starting to consume SaaS-based apps. Yeah. So at 1 or 2 SaaS-based apps, the overhead on the support function is probably small enough that it's okay. When you're at some of the very large vendors, some of the very large enterprises in the country, they've got 60, 80 plus SaaS-based apps. And if I had a couple of years ago, I left a company and we had 12 SaaS-based apps. And 6 months after I left, I still had access to the core CRM system,
And
which
yeah.
is
And
just crazy for a multinational.
And that's a fundamental challenge that we have. You alluded earlier to Active Directory and being the single source of truth. When an individual left an organization, you went into Active Directory and you disabled his account.
Correct.
And you disabled access universally. Today, the challenge we have is that when an individual leaves the organization and you disable their account in Active Directory, what about the 10 to 12 other
And I think that's where the IDM functions are coming in, is they sit in between your Active Directory and everything else.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to expose Active Directory to everything, because it's a single central point of truth. You want to make sure that it's protected, but you want a function to sit in between that when you disable an account over here, kills access to everything else external.
Absolutely.
It's also
That's-
information too. It's not just authentication as in username and password, but
Yep.
who am I? What
function do I do
Yeah,
in
what
the
function,
business?
what
Who's
role
my
do I
manager?
play within the business? Certainly important within customers.
So I guess what we're saying there is not always just about ROI. There's the compliance and risk factors to be considered in these solutions as well.
So like, to give you an idea, the company I work at now, when they moved one of our major CRM applications, it was our ERP application into our workspace portal, effectively it reduced the help desk calls by 65%.
Wow.
Like, that's a huge metric. And that's across all their users, and they've got a global workforce. So, you think of what that could do. That was one application.
Yeah.
Because it gets used once a month, and the user would generally forget their password month to month, and it would be a help desk call.
Yep.
Where, because it's synchronized and managed and the IDM framework takes place, it now makes the whole process easier.
Yep.
And it ultimately reduces risk, because what do most of those people do? They have a spreadsheet or a note, and they've got their passwords.
Stick it on a
pasted
Post-it
somewhere,
note under their keyboard.
Yep. And so you're also reducing risk for the organization at the
And if
same
you're
time.
a big customer, a lot of our bigger customers outsource, especially functions like service desk. That's a massive cost in your outsource in terms of things like password resets, which is an easy one to fix, or synchronization of identity, to actually take that off the service desk queue and actually not pay for those calls. So that's an easy low-hanging fruit in terms of just a cost structure thing to fix.
Totally.
Not to mention the productivity gains, which
Yeah,
you touched
absolutely.
on in
Yeah,
health.
massive.
absolutely.
We've seen studies where it can be as much as a 45-minute saving per day
Yeah.
for some industries, not having to log in multiple times or having to re-authenticate constantly.
Without
Well, in
talking about
healthcare,
security.
Yeah.
That boils down to a clinician seeing 2 more patients a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which has a direct net effect on the hospital, because they're all activity-based funding.
Yeah.
So the more patients I see, the better the level of care I provide, the more money as a hospital I can make, and the less it costs me to provide that level of service.
And I think we can think of many examples in many industries where that would be
Financial
that
services
would be
are
the case.
exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
Because they have traditionally a lot of systems that have disparate security frameworks.
So one of the things that Scott mentioned was very much around the employee provisioning and deprovisioning, and the complexities when we start talking about both on-prem and then cloud-based SaaS offerings. The question, you have to ask the question: what can our customers actually do? What's available out there today?
There's multiple solutions in terms of federation of identity, and Nathan's point's spot on in terms of, you've got this great repository of identity there that you can actually leverage, but then extend that, and making sure your cloud solutions are secure using that identity is really important. So within Microsoft, for example, they use a thing called Azure Active Directory. In the premium version, you can take Active Directory credentials and use those to federate and authenticate, but also provision and deprovision cloud applications. So they've got connection brokers for a whole bunch of third-party providers like Salesforce. There's even a Gmail connector for Google Apps.
Well, the other thing is not everyone is in a position to extend their on-prem Active Directory out into the cloud.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there are solutions that allow you to have that ability to federate out into cloud-based services from within your network.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, VMware have their solution that effectively does exactly that. Sits inside your firewall, sits in between your Active Directory and your external third-party SaaS-based applications, and manages your identity between that single sign-on, and ties everything back to AD, so that when you lock an account, change your password, whatever, that user has no access to any of the cloud-based services. And then you can go through your deprovisioning processes as required.
So both of those talk to on-premise user identity management being extended out to cloud-based services.
Yep.
But we're seeing more and more customers take up or shifting towards a prevalence of cloud-based offerings. At what point does authentication move to the cloud as the primary point, and then you actually start to leverage, on-premise business applications from a cloud-based authentication platform.
To be honest, I think most customers will have to maintain some level of on-prem identity management. I don't think that's ever going to go away. You might have those smaller customers that will move all their AD out to Azure, and that's fine. But the majority of customers have very complex Active Directory solutions today, right?
Yeah.
They have one-way trust, they have different security zones.
Yep.
You can't push all that out into the cloud. So you need a solution that will basically give you the ability to extend it out and leverage things like SAML, token authentication. So have something that sits in between that basically goes off your local AD for authentication, and then we'll do a SAML token exchange out to the cloud to prove that you are who you say you are.
In the application sense, I think that's possible in some instances, but we've got to also remember that these identity systems are being used for things like building management systems, right? These things are being, in the building for 20 years and 20 years to come. I don't think that they're going to see the same cadence of change as Office applications, for example.
The other thing I was going to mention is that identity, we talked about provisioning and deprovisioning, and I think that it's all about identity lifecycle. So it's not just the start and the end; it's also the middle. So as a user, and the role that I play in the business, I get access to different services, and I can consume different pieces of data. If my role changes within that company, my identity management solution needs to cater for that change as well in a fairly automated fashion, so we don't run the risk of providing access to users. Data to users where they don't need it. Firstly, and secondly, users change, move places, especially when you start talking about a multinational organisation where users can go from country to country, and in that situation, your identity management solution also needs to cater for that need as well. So it's all about everything in the middle as well.
So it's about moving to role-based access control as opposed to device level access control that we see today.
It's all about, identity equals context, right? And so essentially, an individual's identity will provide the organization with the context about what they should have access to. And so what we're seeing is that the identity is playing a key role in the types of information, loop back to types of information and the end user experience. So Symantec, through their Semantic Identity and Access Management platform, actually takes the single sign-on aspect. It extends the ADFS to the Active Directory. It takes into consideration SAML and cloud-based applications. But what they're focused on is actually then utilizing that context to provide an experience for an end user, and that experience is based on how they're accessing that information and where they're accessing that information from, and being able to then start to provide other solutions that kind of link into that. So if you look at today on premise, we're very mature when it comes to technology like data loss prevention. We're very mature around providing context to the information that we have within our data center. But as that moves out into the cloud, it's about being able to wrap those same controls that we had internally to those cloud-based applications. And so single sign-on is the first port, but then taking the context and actually then saying, Nathan has access to these particular documents, and should those particular documents belong in Dropbox? Probably not. So I'll be able to
start geo-fencing
exactly.
data so that
wrapping the appropriate controls around that data to say you can't actually move that information into Dropbox. Or if I post in Yammer as an example, and I have a document that potentially is deemed internal and confidential, I need to be able to then wrap the appropriate controls around that document to control another individual sharing that out to another third party.
Absolutely.
I think also identity, and I take Nathan's point around the fact that it's you can't provide a solution to address one need. It needs to be looked at. We need to take a step back and look at it holistically. Look at my organisational structure. Look at the services that I consume. Look at the data that I have, and then construct an identity management solution to cater for that need. Going with a bespoke solution causes a bit of segregation between identities, which in turn causes risk, adds risk to the organisation.
Plus complexity, right?
Yeah.
Because that goes back to our earlier point around mobility being bigger than just device management. Because what we see traditionally is customers start with, one bespoke point solution for device management. they'll get another one for content, they'll get another one for email, they'll get another one for, you know, secure web, right? Application management. What they end up with very quickly is a very complex environment to an already complex environment.
Yeah.
And that, for the end user, degrades user experience.
Yeah.
Because users have to log to a VPN to get access to this application. What we really want to do is kind of take something that's more holistic, take a step back, make the end user experience as immersive and seamless as possible, take all that complexity away from them and push it out and make IT, you know, we have the technology to do it. It's a matter of taking it away from the end user.